So let's talk about mortality. Why do men die? Why does everybody die, including innocent babies? The tree of life, and what I believe is God's purpose in separating man from the tree of life. So a lot of people have the perception, and I once upon a time had this when I just didn't follow the original Genesis account very closely. But I had the perception that man was created immortal and became mortal when he sinned, ate of the forbidden fruit. Now, it's understandable somewhat that people think this at some point if they don't know a whole lot about the Genesis story. Well, after all, in Genesis 2:17, God said, when you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you will surely die. Well, so then he wouldn't have died before that. So he was made immortal, became mortal when he sinned. Well, so I don't think that's the case at all. I think it's quite evident that man was made mortal. In fact, I believe that we have the same human nature that Adam and Eve were created with. That is, we still have it today as men and women. But that Adam was created mortal, I think is quite evident by the fact that there was the tree of life in the garden, which most people have heard that, even if they haven't read the story. But so the tree of life was there. Well, it was to give life. Well, Adam would not have needed life if he could not have died in the first place, because he was cast away from it after he sinned. Well, so what was the purpose of it being there? If he didn't need it before he sinned and couldn't have it after he sinned, what was its purpose? And so, no, it was quite obvious that the tree of life perpetuated Adam's mortal life. That is, he had a life and he was mortal, but his life would have been endless being in the Garden of Eden, which is the Garden of Paradise. That's what Eden means. And he would have continually, him and Eve and all their descendants, have continually eaten of the tree of life, and they would have lived forever. And so this is especially clear, if you look at it. In Genesis chapter 3 and verse 22, it says, Then Yahweh God said, Behold, the man has become like one of us to know good and evil. And now lest he send forth his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever. And then it says, Therefore Yahweh God sent him out from the Garden of Eden to cultivate the ground from which he was taken. So he drove the man out, and at the east of the Garden of Eden he stationed the cherubim and the flaming sword which turned every direction to guard the way, the tree of life. Let's talk about a few things here. Now, it's quite obvious from that the tree of life was still functional, even after they sinned. It wasn't merely symbolic, as some say. I think I read an article on Answers in Genesis that portrayed the tree as being somewhat symbolic merely. I could be not remembering that correctly, but the fact of the matter is, no, the tree had the fruit was functional. It would have perpetuated man's life, because it clearly says that God cast him out of the garden and guarded the tree of life, lest Adam or anybody, any of his children or descendants after him came and ate of it, they would have lived forever. Now, we're not told a whole lot about the tree of life, but we know already that this is the reason death is universal, that even innocent babies die. I don't know of any inherited sin, inherited guilt, or sin nature in the Bible. This is inferred unnecessarily from a variety of texts, I believe, but it's a separate discussion. But so this does explain quite obvious, and nothing about a sinful nature, any of that, as a result of the first sin is mentioned in Genesis, of course, which you would expect to find it. But nevertheless, I'm not really trying to focus on that. But the fact of the matter is, why do people die universally? If it's not because of some sin nature that we're born with or fallen nature, why do babies die, being innocent? That is, why can they die in the first place if they are innocent and sinless? Well, it's quite obvious, because they have been separated from the tree of life. Man is mortal by nature, and the tree of life was there in the midst of paradise garden, to perpetuate his life. But having sinned, we were cast out of the garden and can no longer partake of that which would have sustained our life indefinitely. So really, the tree of life is what we might, in a sense, call or think of as a fountain of youth. I believe that it would have kept man from aging. Not time-wise, of course, but his body from aging. In other words, we wouldn't have grown old physically. Now, I do not believe also that this was eat of it one time and live forever. That's not what I'm talking about. I believe this would have been a perpetual thing. It would have continually produced fruit. And man in the garden would have ate of this regularly, including other food, of course, because he could have ate of the fruit of the other trees as well. So, in in Revelation, we have what I believe symbolic imagery using the tree of life that is in Genesis. Now, I do believe it was a real tree of life in Genesis, but in Revelation, I believe it's symbolic, but that's neither here nor there. It's certainly using the tree of life imagery in Revelation from Genesis. And it says in Revelation chapter 22, I believe 22, somewhere around there. Verse 2. 22, verse 2, somewhere in that area. It says, in the new heaven and new earth, it talks about the tree of life. And it says that it will bear 12 kinds of fruit. All year round is what it talks about. Which means it regularly bears fruit. Which means it's the idea of man having it all year round. He will eat of it on a normal basis. So I don't think it was like one fruit that you eat and you're indestructible for eternity. No, I believe it would have been something you regularly ate of. It goes on to say in Revelation there in that same text that it's for the healing of the nations. And you see this in other texts in the Old Testament. Again, I think symbolically using the tree of life and connecting it with healing. Well, I believe quite obvious that it would have, for that reason, kept man from physically aging, heals his body. Probably made us very, not indestructible, but nearly because of, some super healing. Now, we're getting somewhat speculative to be too specific, but no doubt the idea of healing is connected with the tree of life. And obviously, if it's going to perpetuate man's life, it's going to do something to that effect. So I do not believe, if you're used to watching movies or even comic books, which I never did read, but the story of the X-Men, you have one character who has mutated genes in which he heals incredibly fast. And he lives for a long period of time. And he doesn't age because of his incredibly rapid healing. And it's very difficult for him to die. So I believe it was very much like that. I believe that's what the tree of life, the fruit, would have done. And so this was our original state. But having sinned, having eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, Adam was cast out. That's what it says. In fact, in verse 22 it says, lest he send forth his hand and also take of the tree of life and eat forever. I believe there's more to the story here. It's not just, I don't believe, just merely a punishment, as if to say, all right, here's the punishment. You're going to suffer. You're really going to pay for it. There was meaning and purpose. It was a necessary consequence enforced by God. It says, lest he live forever. But first it says, man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil from his experience with sin. See, I believe what God is doing and God's purpose behind separating man from the garden and from the tree of life was keeping him from living forever in a sinful world. It is not what man is designed to live in. Man was designed to live in a paradise with God. God is very close to man in the garden. He walked in the garden, as it says. And I believe man's original purpose by God was to, it's quite obvious, it says it, to till the garden. I believe Adam and Eve and his descendants, as they grew, would have spread the garden around the earth. Because he was created to be in the garden, it says, be fruitful and multiply. Well, so their job, of course, was to till the garden, so they multiplied. They would have spread the garden around the earth. Fill the earth, it says. And so the whole earth was meant to be a paradise garden with man living in it in a very close relationship with God. Man is not designed to live in the world that we live in. Now, we manage, and because life itself is valuable and appreciative, and because of God's grace, we do enjoy it still yet. Even with all the grief and the sorrow and the sickness and the death and the horror and the evil. One of the ways in which we do enjoy life is to not think about these things very much. You just simply can't think about, for example, all the horrible things being done to people constantly. The children that are suffering, and if you dwell on it too much, it makes it more difficult to live. Now, of course, this doesn't include our efforts to help the people that need us and to spread good. We have to deal with it to some extent. We have to be mindful and empathetic and sympathetic. But I'm simply saying we just don't dwell on horrible things constantly. That's how we function. We do the best we can in this life. But with all the death, the sickness, and the things that plague us, even from our own sins in our own lives, it's not the world in which we're meant to live. Now, humans inherently, naturally don't want to die because life is meaningful and valuable. We weren't designed to die. We were designed to live forever. That's why we long to live, and we do not want to die. So we still don't want to die even in a fallen world, but we don't really enjoy the world that much. And for us Christians who truly realize that, eternity and a new heaven, a new earth, or call it heaven or what have you, will go on for eternity without sin. A new heaven and a new earth that Peter speaks about, wherein dwells righteousness, no sin, no death, no sorrow. Then it makes death much easier, and Christians look forward to that. But we weren't designed to live in this world forever. It is not good that we would live in this world forever. And so he separated us from the tree of life. Now, I don't believe the tree of life is still there. I'm not the tree of life. Yeah, that's right, the tree of life. I don't want to mix up my trees. But I don't believe the tree of life is still there, or the garden. I don't believe the angel's still standing there. I believe these things would have withered away and died out because man wasn't there taking care of the garden as he was purposed. So man was cast out of the garden by God, and so being mortal by nature, that's why even innocent babies are subject to death, or others. That's just the way that it is, because it's not good that we would live in such a world. There's actually a goodness behind the punishment. So when God said, if you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you will surely die. Not because his nature would change. Not just because God saw that that was just a fitting punishment, although it is. But there was more to it than that. Because it wouldn't be good anymore for man to live in this world forever. He limited his time. God limited man's time. And there is wisdom behind that. Even though we, by nature, long for life and do not look forward to death, generally speaking. So I actually think that it was a goodness of God behind this, and not just merely a punishment just for us to get our just deserts. I'm not saying that's not a part of it. But God, He's not just, because it says in Ezekiel, for example, that God does not take pleasure in the death of the wicked. Well, the world, which is full of His people and the wicked, He didn't just make us die for nothing, or just because He enjoyed it, or because He even liked it. He saw that it was necessary and good. And I thank Him for His wise ways and His goodness towards man.